So for the options, I'm going to make room and organize this FSM a little bit, something like that. So we'll need to create a reference to the prefab for the options. So I'm going to quickly go to project window and look for the prefab. So this is our prefab. It's called option text. So I'm going to go back to Playmaker, select the NPC and create a game object variable. I'm going to call this option prefab and set this as an input. So I'm going to assign this to the assets and I'm going to search for option text. Alright, so I'm going to change this back. The element 2 is going to be 2, which is options. And if I go to variables and go to options set, this is a variable that we've created before. I'm going to take the input so that we can see it here. So what we'll need in this options state is basically spawning the different options that we have. So right now in this array that we have 3 of them. So how do we know that we have 3 of them? That's because the size is 6. So we'll just see if the array length, let's get the options set 1. And before this, I just want to quickly add another state to check if the options set, I'll just call it options set check. Since the option set itself is a array, we can't use the same method that we have here, which is the array get next. So what we'll do is add an integer and let's call this option set, and we'll need 3 for now. This will change based on how many option sets you have in the game for this particular NPC. So for now I'm gonna keep it at 1 and you can change it later based on how many options you need. I wish this was like a variable. You can also, another alternative to int switch is basically doing an int compare. So this will be something that you will need to specify when you're making the NPC. So you can look at the number of options set that you or your narrative designer has made and you can assign the number of int switches here. So all you need is one options state that it needs to go to. So I'm going to call an event called 1, or I'm going to just change it to set 1. And here is our state. What you can do is completely get rid of the array length and you can do a int switch here as well. So this is going to be our options length, and so you can do an int switch with 3 different switches where the int is compared, options length is compared to, let's say 4, which is going to be 2 options, because the first option will be element 0, second option element 1, first option's response will be element 2, and second option response will be element 3. So that is the implementation that we can use. So that way we can use the int switch to send, let's say this is options, 2 options, and you can say 3 options and 4 options. And once you do that, you can get the 2 options and create a new state from that one. And in this one, you can create object. And here we are going to create the option prefab inside the dialog UI. So dialog UI is the dialog box, and inside that we are going to create the options. And we'll be creating 2 of them. So I'll just duplicate the same. Actually, before duplicating, I'll just store the object and create a new variable. This is going to be option 1, and I'll duplicate it and call this option 2. I'm going to call this populate options so that it's self-explanatory. We can even add a description. So once I do that, I'll just remove this spawn point variable and I'll go back to the dialog NPC state, and I'm going to get the text mesh pro UGUI text action, and I'm going to paste it here. Here I'm going to specify it to be option 1, and for the option 1 it is going to take the first element of the option set. So I'm going to call this array get. So rather than get next, we are directly using the get. So this will be option set 1, and we are going to get the first element, option 1 text. And I'm going to drag it above the set text and assign the option 1 text here. Once I do that, I'll just duplicate both of them and do the same thing for the option 2. Except here, I'm gonna change this to index 1, which will be this particular option. And here I'm gonna change it to option 2, which is the second prefab that we just spawned. So I think that should do it for the 2 options 1. And let's bring another state, and let's branch out to another state where we'll check for input. And here I'm gonna quickly get the UI button on click event, and here I'm gonna change it to the option 1 and option 2, and I'm gonna create an event called 1. We don't want this to be very complicated, so I'm just gonna make it 1 and 2, and we'll be using the same events for the other option scenarios as well. So I'm gonna drag out the first one, and let's call this response 1, and this is response 2. And here we forgot one thing, which is to set the player as the speaker. So I'm gonna quickly add that on top of here, and also add it to the comment here. Set the player as the speaker. I think that should explain most of the things that this state does. And once we do that, it's gonna take our input, and if we press the first option, then the speaker should change back to the NPC. So I'm gonna quickly copy this particular action here, which is going to set the NPC as the speaker. I'm gonna paste it in both of these states. And here I'm gonna change the dialog text to response, or we can just keep it dialog. But we need to get the array. I'm gonna copy this and paste it here. And this is getting index 3. Index 3 is this one. But this scenario is basically for 2 options. So let's actually make it 4. So if you select this one, it's going to get the index 3, which is this one. And it's gonna set it to dialog. And it's gonna set the dialog text to dialog. So that's exactly what we need. I'm gonna quickly get the E key as well and finish it and send it back to the conversation. And the same goes for this one as well, except this is going to be 4, and I'll just hook this up to the start of the conversation. Alright, so this is a separate area for us. So I'm gonna keep them in one particular place so that it's easy to read, maybe something like that. And I'm gonna copy all of this, paste it here. I'm gonna quickly get rid of the description here, and let's see what we need to change here. So there'll be another option prefab, and that's going to be option 3, and we'll need to set the option 3's text as well. Option 3 text and option 3 text. I'm actually gonna get rid of the 4 options possibility, because I think the screen space is not enough for having 4 options, and that's a little bit too complicated. But we can still use the same functionality to implement that. But the whole idea is for creating a cozy game. We don't want complicated stuff going on. So I'm gonna quickly add another transition here and use option 3 and say 3, and I'm gonna create another response state and hook the option 3 transition to this one. So it'll be 3 responses, and so for 2 options it's going to be the 3rd index and 4th index. But for the 3 options, it's going to be starting with the 4th one. So I think I made a mistake here. The array get for the response 1 for the 2 options scenario will be element 2, So I'm going to change the index to 2, and this is going to be 3. So this is 2, this is 3, and we'll use the 0 and 1 as the options, and 2 and 3 as the responses. So just wanted to fix that. And the same way, this is going to start with element 3, which is index 3, because there are 3 options. So if I make this 6, so 0, 1, 2 will be the choices, and 3, 4, 5 will be the responses. So I'm going to quickly undo that, and 3, 4, 5, and we don't need to change much in this one. And we can completely change this to be procedural, where if the options length is, let's say, 6, then it divides it by 2, and it's gonna subtract 1. So let's say the length is like 8, and it's gonna go for 8 by 2, which is 4, and 0, 1, 2, 3 will be the options, and the responses will start from 4. And let's do another scenario. So length is 10, and it would say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 will be the starting point for the responses. You can use this to basically start your options and responses in this particular array get action, but we're not getting into that level of detail yet. So let's actually test this. I'm going to set it to 2 options for now, and we'll eventually see how 3 options also works. So I'm gonna leave it at 0, which is player, NPC, and then options, and then NPC again. So let's just save it and hit play. I'm gonna approach the NPC, press E, and it gets the first player dialog. I'm gonna press E again, NPC dialog, because it's 1, and options length. Okay, I forgot to add the options length as the input. So I'm gonna quickly go to the state, get array length, option set 1, and this is options length, and we can just hit play. We'll also need to destroy the options that we create once we finish with the responses, because right now I think it should still display even if we are responding. And you can see that we have the options, but the scale is off. So I'm gonna go to the option text and see what's happening here. I'm gonna enable the link here and change this to 1. I'm gonna change the same for this one as well. As you can see, the dialog text is not deactivated, so that is one change that we'll need to do. We need to deactivate the NPC dialog text. So if I click on this one, we are getting the element 2, which is I'm busy right now. So it's working fine. And if I press E, it would go back to the second dialog of the NPC, which is this one. So I'm going to come out with the play mode. So if it is options, I'll just do an activate game object. And here I'm going to specify game object and get the dialog text, which is this one. Let's actually get the child number action as well, because if we don't have reference to the dialog text, then it'll throw an error. So it's better to have both of them. And here I'm going to deactivate it. And once we have a reference, we don't need the first action. So here it's going to go to option and it's going to check for input. And once we click on the input, it would activate the dialog text again. And let's just add that everywhere in the responses. Alright, so let's hit play. Alright, it looks like it did not deactivate it. Let's see what happened there. Dialog text is showing this one. So if I deactivate it, it's going to collapse to the size that we need, which it's not currently doing. Okay, let's just see if that works. If it's the order of the actions, there we go. Now it's working. So I'm going to quickly go to the option text scale. And if you see, the scale is currently set to 1, 1, 1. But it's because of the scaling, the other issue is also showing up. Okay, So if I make this 0.75, let's see what happens. Now it's working properly. So it's taking the parents' scale into consideration. That's the reason it's not working properly. So now it's working till this part. So if I click on this one, you can see that this text shows up, but we are still having these options. So once we do that, we can just destroy objects. So we can quickly add the destroy object action and get rid of the option 1 and 2. I'm going to put it at the top so that it does that first. And the same goes for the 3 options condition as well, except there's another one for option 3. So I'll just save that and hit play. So it does show up the option, and you can see that there's no option text here. Alright, so once we reach the end of this array, which decides the number of interactions this particular conversation has, so it will trigger this finished event once it runs you through all the different elements. So what we can do is create a finished state here, and let's say close dialog box. So this is where we'll handle the animation of the conversation box. Let's also do a open dialog box action here, which is solely just for animation, and I'm gonna tween the scale. And if you specify game object and go for dialog box, dialog UI, and from current scale to 1, actually to 0.75 on all axes. I'm gonna give it a ease in out quad and make it 0.5 so that it looks good. I'm gonna copy the same thing, go to close dialog box, except here it's gonna go back to 0, and once that is done, it'll go back into the start state. Alright, so once that is done, we have our conversation system with an option to have 2 options or 3 options, and we have the option for having a dialogue for the player, having a dialogue for the NPC, which are the basic components of the conversation system. So once we have that, we can also use another layer. So let's see. So if I scroll down, and you can see this is our conversation variable, and it's defining all the interactions within it. Similarly, what we can do is create an integer that contains a reference to which conversation is going to be triggered when the player interacts. So that way we'll be in total control of the conversation. Let's say the player already spoke to the NPC, then there should be a dialogue that is going to repeat. And there are certain dialogues that are unlocked once an event is finished. So there are like many complicated ways that we can take this to. So let's just test the animation. I'm gonna quickly make the dialog box 0 and let's hit play. Alright, so there seems to be some text, but I think that's fine. We can just delete the text, initial text. Alright, so our interaction is over and it's back into the start state. Alright, so I've quickly added a conversation with 7 interactions. So this is just to stress test our new conversation system. So the NPC, so the player goes first, an NPC, and the player again, and then the NPC for thrice, and then we have options to end the conversation. I've also made a small change where I've added tween scale for the dialog box, and it's gonna basically scale up just before we show the text. And I'm gonna remove the finish event on this one because we don't need that. And similarly, I've added a finished event for the array get next in the start conversation state. So this is where it'll reach once each interaction is over. So basically, once it is finished, it would trigger saying that all the elements in this array are over. So it's gonna go to close dialog box, which is the same exact action in a separate state, and it's gonna go back to the start state. That's basically the minor changes I've made, and I've added this placeholder dialogues, options, and responses. So let's just hit play and see if our system is working fine. Let me just go full screen. So we have our player, and if we enter a particular range, we have the NPC saying E to interact. And I'm gonna press E, and example dialog 1 player and example dialog 1 NPC. I've not added NPC here, but the player is the only difference. Now it's gonna trigger the NPC twice again, 3 and 4, and now we have options. There we go. And if I choose option, wait a second. So it looks like the array get for the option set 1 in the second scenario is having 1 instead of 2. So I just quickly change that. So now it should show option 3 and response 3. Option 3, and it should be response 3. And now it's gonna scale back. And that's the end of our conversation. So that's basically our conversation system.